The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling streets of New York City. In the midst of the chaos, a 12-year-old boy named Ethan stood on a busy corner, his violin cradled between his chin and shoulder. The towering skyscrapers loomed above him, stark against the painted sky. But Ethan was oblivious to everything except the music that flowed from his fingertips. He began to play a haunting melody, each note resonating with the weight of his dreams, fears, and the struggles he faced at home. As his bow glided across the strings, the city's cacophony faded into the background. The rich, soulful sounds of his violin wrapped around passers-by like a warm embrace, drawing them closer. A small crowd began to gather, their faces lighting up with curiosity and admiration. Ethan's fingers danced over the strings, weaving in and out of the melody, his heart pouring out into each note. He felt free, as if the music could lift him above the concrete jungle and into a world where his troubles didn't exist. "Look at that kid," a woman exclaimed, nudging her friend. "He plays like he's been doing it for years." "Right? It's like he's channeling something deep," her friend replied, captivated. "I could listen to this all day." Lost in his performance, Ethan barely noticed the crowd's growing size. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the rhythm of the city pulse around him. The warmth of the sun on his skin and the gentle breeze made him feel alive. For a moment, he was not just a boy from a struggling household, but a musician with a gift, creating something beautiful for the world to hear. As the final note lingered in the air, Ethan opened his eyes and the applause erupted around him. He took a deep breath, a shy smile breaking across his face as he recognized the appreciation in their cheers. He bowed slightly, his heart swelling with pride. But as the crowd began to disperse, returning to their busy lives, a familiar figure caught his eye. Sarah, his mother, stood a few paces away, her gaze heavy with a mix of pride and worry. She clutched a few crumpled bills in her hand, remnants of their meager earnings. Ethan felt a pang in his chest as he approached her, the weight of their reality settling back in. "You played beautifully, Ethan," she said, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "Thanks, Mom," Ethan replied, his voice a soft whisper. "Did you see how many people stopped to listen?" "Yes, but—" Sarah hesitated, glancing at their surroundings. "We need to think about our bills, Ethan. This won't pay the rent." Ethan nodded, the joy of performing quickly replaced by the harsh reality of their situation. He reached into his pocket, feeling the few dollars he had earned. "I made some money today. Maybe we can buy something nice for dinner." As they walked home, the weight of their financial struggles loomed over them. Inside their modest apartment, the walls were thin, and the sounds of the city filtered in, a constant reminder of the life they were striving to improve. Sarah set a pot of water on the stove, her movements slow and deliberate. "Ethan, do you ever think about what it would be like to play in big concert halls?" she asked, trying to steer the conversation away from their problems. "Sometime," he admitted, gazing out of the window at the distant skyline. "I want to play for more people, to share my music with the world. Just remember, with that kind of ambition comes a lot of pressure," she warned gently, her eyes searching his. "I don't want you to lose yourself in it." "I won't," Ethan promised, though uncertainty gnawed at him. As they sat down for a simple dinner of rice and beans, he couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were on the brink of change. After dinner, Ethan lay in bed, the sounds of the city drifting through his window, blending with the fading echoes of his performance. His mind raced with thoughts of dreams and responsibilities, the weight of his mother's worries pressing down on him. As sleep began to claim him, he thought of the music, the notes that had the power to carry him away. But he also felt the tug of reality, a reminder that every dream came with sacrifices. Would he be able to balance his passion with the life they needed? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered, as he drifted into a restless sleep. Ethan stood beneath the bright midday sun, his violin resting against his shoulder as he tuned it with delicate precision. The bustling streets of New York City surrounded him, a cacophony of voices, honking cars, and the distant rumble of the subway. Yet in that moment, all that mattered was the music. As he struck the first note, the world around him faded into a blur. His fingers glided over the strings, drawing forth a melody that seemed to rise above the chaos, capturing the attention of passers-by. Among the crowd was Mr. Thompson, a businessman who radiated an air of confidence and sophistication in his tailored suit. He paused mid-step, his attention ensnared by the emotive strains emanating from the young boy. The sound was raw, filled with a passion that belied Ethan's age. Mr. Thompson's heart stirred as he observed the boy's intense focus. It was as if Ethan was pouring his very soul into the instrument. As Ethan concluded his piece, a moment of silence enveloped the street, the crowd momentarily frozen in time, before erupting into applause. Ethan's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and embarrassment. He had always been shy about his talent. He collected the few crumpled bills tossed into his open case, grateful yet aware of how meager the earnings were. After the last of the crowd dispersed, Mr. Thompson approached Ethan, a warm smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "That was truly remarkable," he said, his voice smooth and inviting. "What's your name, young man?" Ethan looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Ethan," he replied, still clutching his violin. "Thank you." "Ethan, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Mr. Thompson," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "I couldn't help but notice how passionate you are about your music. What's your story?" Ethan's gaze drifted down to the sidewalk, the weight of his circumstances pressing on him. "Well, my mom and I have been struggling," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I play here to help pay the bills. Music it's everything to me. It helps me forget, you know?" "I understand," Mr. Thompson replied, nodding thoughtfully. "Talent like yours deserves to be nurtured and shared with the world. Have you ever thought about pursuing formal music education?" Ethan hesitated, the thought swirling in his mind like a whirlwind. "I've dreamed about it, but it's just a dream. I don't know if it's possible." "I might be able to make that dream a reality," Mr. Thompson offered, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "What if I told you I could fund your education at a prestigious music school? You could learn from the best and really develop your talent." For a moment, Ethan felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. The prospect of attending a renowned school was exhilarating, yet terrifying. "Are you serious?" he stammered, disbelief washing over him. "You'd really do that for me?" "Absolutely," Mr. Thompson assured him, his tone earnest. "I see potential in you, Ethan, but it's important to understand that with opportunities come sacrifices. Fame and success can change everything." Ethan's heart raced as he processed Mr. Thompson's words. He could envision a life filled with music, performing on grand stages, but the thought of losing himself in the process gnawed at him. I I don't know. It sounds amazing, but what if I forget why I started playing in the first place?" Mr. Thompson studied Ethan closely, recognizing the conflict swirling within the boy. "That's a valid concern. It's a journey, Ethan. You'll need to be true to yourself, no matter where the path leads. But I believe you have the strength to navigate it." As they spoke, the noise of the city faded into a distant hum, and Ethan felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. Yet alongside it, the weight of anxiety settled heavily on his shoulders. "Can I think about it?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Mr. Thompson replied, a knowing smile on his face. "Take your time. I'll be around if you decide to reach for this opportunity." As the businessman walked away, Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. The sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and he felt a mix of exhilaration and dread coursing through him. Could he really step into a world of fame, leaving behind the safety of the streets where he played for love? The thought lingered as he picked up his violin again, the familiar weight offering a sense of comfort. He played a soft tune, letting the music weave through his uncertainty, hoping it would guide him to the right decision. Ethan sat cross-legged on the worn-out rug of their tiny apartment, the weight of Mr. Thompson's offer hanging heavily in the air. He glanced up at his mother, Sarah, who stood by the kitchen counter, her back turned as she washed the few dishes they owned. The rhythmic clinking of metal against porcelain echoed, amplifying the tension that filled the room. Ethan's heart raced, a mix of excitement and anxiety coursing through him. "Mom," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Thompson wants to help me go to music school. He says I have a chance to be, well, famous." Sarah paused, her hands stilling in the warm water. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a blend of hope and apprehension. Ethan, that's wonderful. But what does that mean for you? What does fame mean to you? Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his fingers fidgeting with the strings of his violin. I don't know. It means I could play more. For bigger audiences. I could make money, yes, she interrupted, her voice firm but gentle. But at what cost? You know how the world is. It's not just about talent. It's about how you fit into their mold. Ethan's brow furrowed. But isn't that what I want? To play my music? To be recognized for it? Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping as she walked over to sit beside him. Ethan, I want you to have every opportunity. You're so talented and I'm so proud of you. But I worry that in chasing fame, you might lose what makes your music special. Are you saying I shouldn't take the offer? His voice cracked slightly, a hint of frustration creeping in. I'm saying you should think carefully. Success can change people, Ethan. It can change you. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. But if I don't take this chance, what if I regret it? What if I never get another opportunity like this? Regret can come from many choices, Sarah replied, her eyes searching his. It's not just about this moment. It's about the path you choose and how it will shape you. You have to decide what matters most to you. The room fell silent, the only sounds the faint hum of the city outside and the dripping of water from the faucet. Ethan felt torn, suspended between the promise of a brighter future and the fear of losing himself in the pursuit of it. He picked up his violin, letting the familiar weight ground him. Can I just play for a minute? Of course, Sarah said softly, her voice barely a whisper as she leaned back, giving him space. As he drew the bow across the strings, a haunting melody filled the air, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. The notes spoke of his dreams and fears, intertwining in a story only he could tell. He poured his heart into the music, hoping to drown out the doubt swirling in his mind. After several minutes, he finished, the final note hanging in the air long after he stopped. Ethan looked up to see tears glistening in his mother's eyes. You see, Ethan, that's the magic you have. You don't need fame to share it. He felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, confusion, longing, but he couldn't articulate them. Instead, he set the violin aside and lay back on the floor, staring at the ceiling. Maybe I should meet with Mr. Thompson again. I need to understand what this all really means. Sarah nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. Just promise me you'll keep your heart in the right place, no matter what happens. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself walking down the bustling streets of New York City, the sounds of laughter, chatter, and honking cars swirling around him. The weight of the decision loomed large as he approached the park where he had initially met Mr. Thompson. As he entered the park, he spotted the businessman sitting on a bench, his tailored suit contrasting sharply with the casual atmosphere around him. Mr. Thompson looked up and smiled, his eyes glimmering with ambition. Ethan, I'm glad you could make it. I've been looking forward to discussing our plans. Ethan took a deep breath, the scent of fresh flowers and cut grass briefly distracting him from his nerves. I want to understand the contract better. What does it really mean for me? Mr. Thompson gestured for him to sit. I'm glad you're thinking critically. This is more than just an opportunity, it's a partnership. With my guidance and your talent, we can craft a career that will place you in front of audiences around the world. Ethan felt the pressure mounting at every word. But what if I don't want to play the music you think will sell? What if I want to create my own? But therein lies the challenge, my young friend. To become a true star, you must appeal to the masses. We'll work together to find your unique sound within the framework of what's popular. It's about balance. Ethan nodded slowly, a mix of intrigue and unease swirling within him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the path laid out before him was a double-edged sword. As they continued discussing the intricacies of the contract, Ethan felt a growing disconnection between the dreams he held close and the commercial reality Mr. Thompson painted. Leaving the meeting, Ethan wandered into the nearby park, seeking solace in the familiar sounds of nature and laughter. He sat on a bench, clutching his violin, and closed his eyes. The world around him faded away, leaving only the gentle hum of his thoughts. His mother's concerns echoed in his mind, urging him to reflect on his true passion. He could almost hear her voice, reminding him that music was about connection, not just recognition. As he lifted his violin once more, Ethan understood that the allure of fame was strong, but it was the joy of playing that he truly yearned for. The hallways of the prestigious music school echoed with the sounds of various instruments, each note blending into a cacophony that both inspired and intimidated Ethan. As he stepped into the vast auditorium for the first time, he felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him. The polished wooden floor gleamed under the bright lights, and the walls adorned with framed photographs of legendary musicians seemed to whisper tales of greatness. Ethan clutched his violin, his heart racing as he took in the scene. Other students, older and more experienced, warmed up with confident scales and intricate pieces. "Hey, you're the kid who plays on the street, right?" A girl with curly hair and a bright smile approached him, her own violin slung casually over her shoulder. "I've heard you. You're really good." Ethan managed a shy smile, feeling a flicker of warmth at her words. "Thanks, I'm just trying to keep up," he replied, glancing around nervously. "You'll do great," she encouraged, her enthusiasm infectious. "I'm Mia. Just don't let the pressure get to you. Remember why you started playing in the first place?" With that, she dashed off to join her group, leaving Ethan standing alone, contemplating her words. As days turned into weeks, Ethan's initial excitement began to wane. The rigorous training sessions pushed him to his limits. His instructors, though talented, seemed to prioritize perfection over passion. "Ethan, you need to play with more energy," one of them chided during a particularly grueling practice. "The audience wants to feel the music, not just hear it." The pressure was suffocating. He found himself caught in a cycle of rehearsals, critiques, and late-night assignments. The joy of playing, the very essence that had drawn him to music, started to fade. One evening, after a long day of practice, he returned home to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her face lined with worry. "Ethan, honey, you've been so distant lately. Is everything all right at school?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy," he replied, avoiding her gaze. He didn't want to burden her with his struggles, yet he felt the weight of his silence pressing down on him. "Are you sure? You can talk to me about anything, you know that, right?" Sarah's eyes searched his, and for a moment, Ethan considered confiding in her about the pressure he felt, to conform, to succeed, to fulfill the expectations set by Mr. Thompson. "I know, Mom. I need to focus on my music," he said finally, forcing a smile. But as the days turned into late nights filled with practice, the pressure continued to mount. In one class, his instructor suggested he adapt a more commercial sound to appeal to wider audiences. "You have the talent, Ethan, but you need to think about your marketability," she insisted, her tone both encouraging and demanding. "But I want to play what I love," Ethan protested, his voice shaky. "I don't want to lose that." "Ethan, if you want to make it big, you have to think about what sells. You can't just play for yourself anymore," she replied, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. The words echoed in Ethan's mind, gnawing at him. He began to feel like a puppet, strings pulled by the desires of others rather than his own. Each day he fought to keep a hold of his passion, yet the joy of playing music for its own sake seemed to drift further away. The culmination of his internal struggle came during a school performance, where students showcased their best pieces. Ethan, feeling a surge of determination, decided to perform a piece he had composed, a reflection of his journey, filled with both hope and fear. As he played, the notes flowed from his heart, resonating with the audience. For that fleeting moment, he felt liberated. The crowd's applause was thunderous, yet amidst the cheers, he caught Mr. Thompson's critical gaze from the back of the auditorium. As he stepped off the stage, Ethan's heart sank when Mr. Thompson approached him. "Ethan, that was interesting," Mr. Thompson said, his voice lacking enthusiasm. "But you really need to focus on what will appeal to a broader audience. This isn't going to get you the recognition you need." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had poured his soul into that piece, and yet it felt dismissed. "But it's my music," he replied, a hint of defiance in his voice. "Your music needs to be marketable. Remember, success isn't just about talent, It's about what people want to hear, Mr. Thompson insisted, a steely glint in his eyes. Ethan felt trapped, the walls of expectation closing in on him. His heart ached, torn between the desire for recognition and the need to stay true to himself. He stood there, feeling as though he was losing the very essence of what made him a musician. In that moment, he realized that the path he was on was straying further from the joy that had once filled his heart when he played. Ethan had never imagined that the bright lights of fame would come with such heavy shadows. The once vibrant melodies he played now felt like echoes of a distant past, drowned out by the cacophony of public expectations and media scrutiny. As he stood backstage at the prestigious music school, he could hear the whispers of the audience, their excitement palpable. But beneath it all, a tight knot of anxiety coiled in his stomach. "Ethan, you ready?" a fellow student asked, adjusting his bow tie nervously. His name was Lucas, a talented pianist with a penchant for showmanship. "Yeah, just give me a moment," Ethan replied, forcing a smile. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, the pressure to conform to a commercial image gnawing at his resolve. He could hear Mr. Thompson's words echoing in his mind, urging him to play what would sell, what would make him a star. As the curtain rose, the bright stage lights washed over him, and for a fleeting moment, he felt the familiar thrill of performing. But as he began to play, the joy that once accompanied his music was replaced by a sense of obligation. Each note felt like a compromise, a trade-off for success that he was no longer sure he wanted. After the performance, Ethan slipped into the school courtyard, seeking solace in the crisp air. He leaned against a wall, inhaling deeply, trying to shake off the unease. Just then, he spotted his mother, Sarah, approaching. Her face lit up with pride as she caught sight of him, but Ethan could see the worry etched in her eyes. "Ethan, that was incredible!" she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around him. "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled, his voice lacking enthusiasm. "Are you okay? You seem different," she observed, her brow furrowing. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's just, everything's changed. I feel like I'm losing myself in all this." "What do you mean?" Sarah pressed, her concern deepening. "I don't play for me anymore. I'm playing for everyone else. What they want to hear, what sells. It's like I'm just a product now," he confessed, his voice growing strained. Sarah's expression softened. "Sweetheart, you've always had a gift. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Remember why you started playing in the first place?" Ethan nodded, recalling the evenings spent under the streetlights, his violin cradled in his arms, pouring his heart into every note. "I just wanted to share my music," he murmured, the weight of realization settling upon him. "Then do that. You don't have to be what others expect you to be. You can still create and perform for yourself," Sarah encouraged, her voice unwavering. "I don't know if I can go back to that," he admitted, feeling lost. "Maybe you don't have to go back. Maybe you can find a way to blend both worlds," Sarah suggested, her eyes shining with hope. Ethan contemplated her words, feeling a flicker of inspiration. He remembered the joy of playing on the streets, where he could express his emotions freely, without judgment or commercial constraints. "I think I need a break," he finally said, the decision crystallizing in his mind. "From school?" Sarah asked, surprise evident in her tone. "From performing altogether. I want to rediscover why I fell in love with music in the first place," Ethan replied. "Then let's do it. Let's find a way for you to reconnect with your roots." Sarah beamed, her support bolstering his resolve. With newfound determination, Ethan ventured back to the streets of New York, where the hustle and bustle faded into the background as he set up his spot on a familiar corner. The air was crisp, infused with the scent of food vendors and the distant sound of laughter. He took a deep breath, feeling an exhilarating rush of familiarity. As he lifted his violin to his chin, the first note resonated through the air, raw and authentic. The world around him melted away, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt truly free. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one a piece of his heart laid bare. A small crowd began to gather, their faces lighting up with curiosity and joy. He played for them. No expectations, no judgment, just music. The melodies danced in the air, weaving a tapestry of emotions that connected him to each listener. And in that moment, he rediscovered the magic of his gift, realizing that true success was not measured by fame, but by the impact of his music on others and the joy it brought him. Ethan stood in the familiar chaos of the city streets, his heart racing as he began to play. The bow glided over the strings of his violin, producing a melody that floated above the bustling noise of New York City. Just as he started to regain his confidence, the unmistakable silhouette of Mr. Thompson appeared on the edge of the crowd. The businessman's sharp suit contrasted starkly with the worn jeans and faded t-shirt Ethan wore. Yet it was the glint of ambition in Mr. Thompson's eyes that made Ethan's stomach twist with anxiety. The crowd had thickened around him, drawn not just by the music, but by the presence of this powerful figure. Ethan finished his piece, the final note lingering in the air like a promise. As the applause erupted, Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his expression a mix of admiration and determination. "Ethan," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, "that was exceptional. It's just what the world needs to hear." The crowd began to disperse, but Mr. Thompson's gaze locked onto Ethan's with an intensity that sent a shiver down the boy's spine. "I have a proposal for you, one that could make you a household name." Ethan hesitated, his heart racing not with excitement but with dread. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Thompson leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Imagine this, a record deal, a tour, your name in lights. You have the talent, and with the right backing, you could be the next big star." Ethan's mind raced. The vision of fame danced tantalizingly close, but it also felt like a cage. "But what about my music? What if I lose it?" His voice was barely above a whisper, vulnerability creeping into his words. Mr. Thompson's expression softened momentarily. "Ethan, I understand your fears. I faced a similar choice a long time ago." He paused, searching for the right words, the facade of the businessman slipping just a bit. "I chose fame. I thought it would bring me happiness, but—" His voice trailed off, and Ethan saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. "It cost me more than I could have imagined. My family, my peace, my love for music." Ethan's heart sank. The weight of Mr. Thompson's confession hung in the air. He had always viewed success as a clear path, but now the road ahead seemed fraught with peril. "So, you're saying it's not worth it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I'm saying you have to decide what success means to you," Mr. Thompson replied, his tone serious. "It's easy to get lost in the glitz and the glamour. But it's your music, Ethan. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Just as the conversation took a deeper turn, a small voice broke through the air. A young girl, no older than 8, approached Ethan timidly, clutching a plastic violin that looked as though it had seen better days. "Excuse me," she said softly, her big, hopeful eyes shining. "Can you teach me how to play like you?" Ethan blinked, momentarily taken aback. He had never considered himself a teacher, let alone a role model. Yet in that moment, he felt an unexpected warmth bloom within him. "You want to learn?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. "Yes," she exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. "I love music, but I don't know how to play." Ethan exchanged a glance with Mr. Thompson, who watched with an expression that was hard to read. The businessman's presence felt less imposing now, almost like a distant echo of a world Ethan was beginning to question. "Okay," Ethan said, a smile breaking through his uncertainty. "Let's start with the basics." He took the girl's plastic violin and demonstrated a simple note, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt for a while. As the girl giggled and tried to mimic the sound, Ethan realized that perhaps his true calling wasn't about being in the spotlight. Maybe it was about sharing his passion, inspiring others to find their voices. The thought was liberating, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity. The crowd faded into the backdrop as Ethan focused solely on the girl before him, her laughter mingling with the distant sounds of the city. He understood now that the choice he faced was not just about fame. It was about the music, the joy, and the connections forged through it. As he played alongside her, a new melody began to form in his heart, one that resonated with hope and authenticity. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience lingering in the tension of Ethan's decision. What path would he ultimately choose? In that moment, it didn't matter. For now, he was simply a boy with a violin, and that was enough.